Now they were coming again. And while everything had gone much as it had foreseen, something it had not foreseen had returned. That maddening, galling fear, that sense of another. It hated the fear, would have turned on it and eaten it if it could have, but the fear danced mockingly out of reach. It could only kill the fear by killing them. Surely there was no need for such fear. They were older now, and their numbers had been reduced from 7 to 5. 5 was a number of power, but it did not have the mystical talismanic quality of 7. It was true that its dog's body hadn't been able to kill the librarian, but the librarian would die in the hospital later. Just before dawn touched the sky, it would send a male nurse with a bad pill habit to finish the librarian once and for all. The writer's woman was with it now, alive yet not alive. Her mind had been utterly destroyed by the first sight of it, as it really was, with all of its little mask and glamours thrown aside, and all of the glamours were only mirrors, of course, throwing back the terrified viewer the worst thing in his or her own mind, heliographing images as a mirror may bounce a reflection of the sun into a wide, unsuspecting eye and stun it into blindness. Now the mind of the writer's wife was with it, in it, beyond the end of the Macroverse, in the darkness beyond the turtle, in the outlands beyond all lands. She was in its eye. She was in its mind. She was in the deadlights. Oh, but the glamours were amusing. Hallen, for instance, he would not remember, not consciously, but his mother could have told him where the bird he had seen in the ironworks came from. When he was a baby, only 6 months old, his mother had left him sleeping in the cradle in the side yard while she went around back to hang sheets and diapers on the line. His screams had brought her on the run. A large crow had lighted on the edge of his carriage and was pecking at the baby, Mikey, like an evil creature in a nursery tale. He had been screaming in pain and terror, unable to drive away the crow, which had sensed weak prey. She had struck the bird with her fist and driven it off, seeing that it had brought blood in 2 or 3 places on baby Mike's arms, and had taken him to Dr. Stillwagon for a tetanus shot. A part of Mike had remembered that always. Tiny baby, giant bird. And when it came to Mike, Mike had seen the giant bird again. But when the dog's body husband of the girl from before brought the writer's woman, it had put on no face. It did not dress when it was home. The dog's body husband had looked once and dropped dead of shock. His face gray, his eyes filling with blood that had squirted out of his brain in a dozen places. The writer's woman had put out one powerful, horrified thought. "Oh dear Jesus, it's female!" And then all thoughts ceased. She swam in the deadlights. It came down from its place and took care of her physical remains, prepared them for later feeding. Now Audra Dinborough hung high up in the middle of things, crisscrossed in silk, her head lolling against the socket of her shoulder, her eyes wide and glazed, her toes pointing down. But there was still power in them, diminished but still there. They had come here as children somehow, against all the odds, against all that was supposed to be, all that could be. They had hurt it badly, had almost killed it, had forced it to flee deep into the earth where it huddled, hurt and hating and trembling in a spreading pool of its own strange blood. So another new thing, if you please. For the first time in its never-ending history, it needed to make a plan. For the first time, it found itself afraid simply to take what it wanted from Derry, its private game preserve. It had always fed on children. Many adults could be used without knowing they had been used, and it had even fed on a few of the older ones over the years. Adults had their own terrors, and their glands could be tapped, opened, so that all of the chemicals of fear flooded the body and salted the meat. But their fears were mostly too complex. The fears of children were simpler, and usually more powerful. The fears of children could often be summoned up in a single face, and if bait were needed, why, what child did not love a clown? It understood vaguely that these children had somehow turned its own tools against it, that, by coincidence, surely not guided by the hand of some other, but by the bonding of 7 extraordinarily imaginative minds. It had been brought into a zone of great danger. Any of these 7 alone would have been its meat and drink, and if they had not happened to come together, it surely would have picked them off one by one, drawn by the quality of their minds, just as a lion might be drawn by one particular waterhole by the scent of a zebra. But together, they had discovered an alarming secret that even it had not been aware of. That belief has a second edge. If there are 10,000 medieval peasants who create vampires by believing them real, there may be one, probably a child, who will imagine the stake necessary to kill it. But a stake is only stupid wood. The mind is the mallet which drives it home. Yet in the end, it had escaped, had gone deep and exhausted. Terrified children had elected not to follow it when it was at its most vulnerable. They had elected to believe it dead or dying, and had retreated. It was aware of their oath, and it had known they would come back, just as a lion knows a zebra will eventually return to the waterhole. It had begun to plan, even as it began to drowse. When it woke, it would be healed, renewed, but their childhoods would be burned away like 7 fatty candles. The former power of their imaginations would be muted and weak. They would no longer imagine that there were piranha in the Kandusky, or that if you stepped on a crack, you might really break your mother's back, or if you killed a ladybug which lit on your shirt, your house would catch fire that night. Instead, they would believe in insurance. Instead, they would believe in wine and dinner, something not too pretentious like a Puyi Fissé 83, and let that breathe, waiter, would you? Instead, they would believe in Roland's costumes, 47 times their own weight, in excess stomach acid. Instead, they would believe in public television, Gary Hart running to prevent heart attacks, giving up red meat to prevent colon cancer. They would believe in Dr. Rush when it came to getting well fucked, and Jerry Falwell when it came to getting well saved. As each year passed, their dreams would grow smaller, and when it woke, it would call them back. Yes, back, because fear was fertile. It's a child's rage, and rage cried for revenge. It would call them and then kill them. Only now that they were coming, the fear had returned. They had grown up and their imaginations had weakened, but not as much as it had believed. It had felt an ominous, upsetting growth in their power when they had joined together. It had wondered for the first time if it had perhaps made a mistake. But why be gloomy? The die was cast, and not all the omens were bad. The writer was half mad for his wife, and that was good. The writer was the strongest, the one who had somehow trained his mind for this confrontation over all the years. When the writer was dead, his guts falling out of his body, when their precious Big Bill was dead, the others would be its quickly. It would feed well, and then perhaps it would go deep again, and doze for a while.